Hi, welcome to this October wrap-up. It's pretty late, but life, blah blah blah. After reading or finishing 3 books in September, I kind of expected October to be the same, but in the end I did manage to finish quite a few things, so that's nice. And yeah, a lot of my plans, as usual, didn't go through. I definitely don't think I read anything from the Victober TBR that I posted, and partially that was because of various delays in accessing books I wanted to read, but part of it was also just life. So I'm just going to tell you about the books that I read in October. Starting with a play, like an early modern play, by John Lilly, which is a great last name. And yeah, the play was called Galatea, and it's very gay, and it has this lovely line where the gay dressed up in boys' clothes girls say to each other, let us into the grove to make much of each other, something like that. And I was like, well, yeah, it's fun. I found a production and I watched and read it, which is a theme with me watching plays, because I just feel it's important to get a sense of what they're like when people actually say the words aloud. If I had a reading group where we read plays, then I think we would get together to read out each line and stuff. We wouldn't have to act it, but I think that would be fun, because yeah, it just makes you have more of a sense of the different voices. So yeah, I did that, and yeah, it's fun. It's a fun gender non-conforming sapphic queer play. I definitely want to read more of John Lilly's work. Yeah. Oh, I do hope this works. I do hope that the lighting is okay, and also I was going to apologise for all the mess. Yeah, I'm sorry about the mess. Everything is just pretty stressful and a mess. So yeah. So the next thing I read was really quite random, although it does fall in line with my kind of early modern hankering, which I made a video kind of about a while ago. Yeah, I sort of remembered this book of stories, and I remember that you could listen to them. I remember the CD more than I remember the book itself, and they were sort of the children-ified version of some of the folk tales that Shakespeare was inspired by or took from to write his plays. And so I did some sleuthing and I tried to figure out what it was, because I really wanted to listen to it again. I think I maybe talked about it in the early modern video actually, but sometimes I would watch a Shakespeare play or read it or something, and then I'd be like, oh, I thought that this was how the story ended, and I would have a really vivid sense of the story, but it would be different, and that would be because I'd be remembering the story from this. And this is Shakespeare's storybook, Folk Tales That Inspired the Bard, by Patrick Ryan and James Mayhew. And yeah, it has these 2 CDs, which I have listened to. This I found this on eBay for £2, and it's signed, so that's cute. But I didn't realise that when I bought it. And it is quite a nice book, it has some really nice drawings and stuff. I feel often actually this is the style with which people illustrate books that have Shakespeare stories in, these are some classic portraits. It was a very nostalgic experience, but I enjoyed it. I like Kappa Rushes. Yeah, that's right, because I think I talked about King Lear in my early modern video. In fact, did I not read King Lear and I just didn't mark it? Yeah, I think my favourite one is Kappa Rushes, which is based on King Lear, and I do like The Devil's Bet hesitantly, and I like The Hill of Roses too, I guess. But I mean, I do enjoy all of them. And then yeah, there's Shakespeare just chilling with great breeches on. Then the next book I read I finished was Dracula, which I was reading originally on a Dracula Daily kind of schedule, although often I would miss days and then I would catch up in bulk on another day, basically just so I could look at the memes. And then as I was nearing the end of the project, I kind of just wanted to keep reading, and I felt I just wanted to finish it, be done with it. So I did that by myself, which is why I finished it in October rather than November. I think it was supposed to end on November 6th or so. But yeah, I did make a video about my thoughts participating in the Dracula Daily experience, as well as my thoughts on Dracula, so I will leave a link to that and in the cards. No, I mean overall I guess I thought it was a fun experience. And book-wise I didn't particularly enjoy it. I do love vampires, but I just didn't end up really liking Dracula very much, because it's sort of a victim of its own success in a way, so I didn't feel any real fear or any emotions whilst I was reading it, to be honest, because I just kind of knew what was going to happen, and then I knew what was going to happen. I do go into a bit more detail in that video if you want to check it out. Next, I finished a book that I did talk about in my September wrap-up, because I had read some of it. Wow, talking about these books makes them feel extremely far away, so far away, long ago. But yeah, this is Bid Me to Live by HD. and I ended up really enjoying it, and I think it's a great book, really interesting. It does like demand quite a lot of you as a reader. I think it's very, part of me wants to say like imaginative, but I don't know that that is really what I'm looking for. It's very like image dense, I guess, or more like sort of, that's not really true either. It's not that it's hyper descriptive, but it's more like the way that it captures moments of life is extremely vivid, and in that sense it's not especially like linear, although there is like a sort of overarching story that you do definitely come to feel. Yeah, oh, I wish I had talked about this earlier, because like I'm sure I had more things to say. Yeah, I definitely really want to keep reading H.G.'s work, in part because of the book that I read next. I sort of have more of an idea after I've finished reading it about her life and this book, which I really appreciate, but I'll talk about that next. But yeah, I really want to read Paint It Today, which I believe is the like queerest sort of like fictionalized biography that she wrote, but that's all said very, very loosely. And yeah, so obviously I'm very interested in that one. I would really recommend it if you're interested in like modernism and poetry, and also books set in the early 1900s, I don't know, like during the First World War. It is basically about a couple, Rafe and Julia, yeah, and there's been like some infidelity, and it's I think it starts in 1917, and it's just sort of like about that all. And then yes, it's also kind of like a roman à clef, I guess, because like there are people in it who are supposed to represent specific people, so there's a figure who's supposed to represent D.H. Lawrence and stuff like that, so all very interesting. Yeah, the next two books I guess are going to be books that I spoke about in my September reading wrap up, because they are both books that I was also partway through or reading a bit of then. So the next book I finished was Square Haunting, 5 Writers in London Between the Wars by Francesca Wade, which I actually would like to find a physical copy of, because yeah, I want to see like the pictures, and I definitely want to sort of underline and look at the sources of some of the stuff that she was saying, because it was really interesting, even if I also had some like fundamental difficulties with it. I definitely felt like queerness and queer relationships were sort of treated in a like vaguely homophobic way, or like queer desire, I guess. You know, there were some things where it was sort of like, oh, but like Leonard Woolf was the love of Virginia Woolf's life because she never left him or whatever, which like, I mean, you can definitely argue that, sure, but obviously like one of the reasons why she didn't leave him is because like, why would she leave him? Like he gave her a lot of like financial and like physical and like social comfort, like being married was just like useful. I'm not saying that she didn't have any feelings for him or anything, but it's just like silly to then say that like, you know, her love of women is therefore inherently less than that because she didn't leave her husband in the 1920s. Like, why would she leave her husband? Like, it was just kind of bizarre to me. But I did learn a lot, and like I said, I learned a lot about like HD. There's a HD chapter. I do think sometimes the book does still kind of fall into some of the misogynistic biographizing that happens to a lot of these women, even though Francesca Wade is quite like aware of that, but she sort of, yeah, sometimes slightly falls into it, I think. But yeah, it was really interesting. My camera is dying, so I'm not sure if I will finish this, so I'm going to talk as fast as I can. There was 5 women, like it says in the title. Eileen Power, who I'd never heard of before, who was like an economic historian of the early 1900s, really fascinating, like socialist, pacifist woman, really involved in like LSE and Marxism, but basically entirely forgotten today, and sort of popularizing like global, like world history as a critique of like British imperialism, basically, which deeply respect as a political positioning and like as an approach to history, so that was cool. Dorothy L. Sayers, who's the crime writer, who was really interesting. I didn't especially want to know about her, but I did enjoy learning about her life, and I did maybe want to read like a couple of her books. It's like, I'm not a big crime fan, so that's why. Virginia Woolf, obviously, whose chapter was like fine. I didn't really learn very much from it, and she also, like, Francesca Wade really wants to convince you that Virginia Woolf was not a snob, like a classist snob, when like she obviously was. Like, it's, and you know, that's part of her legacy, and like that's what it is. Like, it's silly to try to ignore that or like say, no, she, you know, she never like said any of these things out loud, she just wrote them in her journal. It's like, okay. HD was the 4th one, and then who was the 5th one? Ah, the 5th one was Jane Ellen Harrison, who was also a historian, or actually a classicist, who really affected the view of Greek, like ancient Greek life and religion, especially during sort of the 1890s into the early 1900s, and I think, you know, inspired like Virginia Woolf and the Waves and things like that, and then also all of the other women in the book. Yeah, like I don't know that it really worked entirely, because the conceit is that they were all around this particular square, and it did leave me feeling like there were just lots of gaps, which it does say that there's going to be, but I was also a bit like, well, what exactly is the point? Because it gave me a lot of interesting things and facts about women's lives that I didn't know, but I also felt some like difficulties with how it approached them and like what it was saying and like its sort of overall concept, I guess. Then the next book I finished was Revolutionary Letters by Diane di Prima. I was reading these like throughout, I guess I did start in September, maybe August, but I think September into October, because I was reading at least one per day. Sometimes I'd read way more and sometimes I'd just read one. This is a really wonderful collection of poetry. It's earnest in like the right ways. It takes up a political position that I think is just sometimes like staggeringly beautiful, and really directly also engaging with like violence, and to some degree taking up like what can poetry do like to make the world better, like what is the point of poetry, and like I don't know, I think if you like poetry is completely pointless and useless, and in revolutionary struggle and otherwise, I would give you this book because I think it demonstrates that it's not. But it also sort of shows the parameters of that and like the limitations, like it's not saying that poetry can do everything, and it doesn't, there's only a couple times where I feel like it's directly speaking, like the poems are directly speaking about that, but I do think that yeah, this is a wonderful collection. It's very much like weighted in the time that Diane di Prima was writing, which I think is nice too. And yeah, I would really recommend this, even as someone who doesn't especially like poetry, aside from the poems that can like slice you open, then here's a book that will slice you open in 1,000 ways. Actually, yeah, how many revolutionary letters are there? Okay, here's a book that will slice you open in like 120 ways. The next book I read was actually another poetry collection, which isn't particularly usual for me to read, but this one was The Tragic Death of Eleanor Marx, which I read from the library actually, so that's why I don't have a copy, by Tara Bergin. And as you can probably tell by the title, I was attracted to it by the title, and yeah, like it wasn't great. I did like the poems that were about Eleanor Marx, but I didn't particularly like the rest of it. I found a lot of it just kind of like a bit like simplistic and a bit boring, and kind of like trying to sort of do something but not really bringing very much new to the table, especially around kind of like folk and fairy tale stuff. So yeah, that was only okay. The next book I read was Marxism and Literary Criticism by Terry Eagleton. This was published in like 1976, I want to say, so it's like, I mean it's not necessarily that it's out of date, but like it isn't up to date in terms of recent Marxist critics, and I do think it's a good kind of like introduction and overview to Marxism and literary criticism, or like Marxist literary criticism. I think I will be returning to it to kind of, you know, clarify some of my thoughts if I ever get kind of confused and stuff. And it is only, also there's a PDF online if you want to read it, so you can definitely do that. It's only like 85 pages or something, so that's also like really good, because Marxists do like to go on. Yeah, I genuinely, if you are interested in like literary criticism and Marxism, I would really recommend reading one of these kind of like intros, and then you can kind of also use it to figure out where next you want to go, because he goes through quite a lot of like the arguments that various people made and like the various kind of consequences and conclusions that Marxism draws when it looks at literature and art. And yeah, it also kind of speaks to like directly what Marx and Engels said about art, although not in massive depth, obviously, considering how small it is. Right, and then the last thing that I finished was this 3 collection of plays by Henrik Ibsen, and this has An Enemy of the People, The Wild Duck and Rosmersholm in it. This and the Tara Bergin I did actually talk about at the end of my 1880s vlog video, but this, yeah, I think these are all like lesser known Ibsen plays. I think The Wild Duck is actually still quite famous, and then Rosmersholm is like a hidden kind of classic, I guess. So like I think that's how people sort of see it sometimes. And yeah, I thought An Enemy of the People was okay. I thought The Wild Duck was interesting, but I didn't like the ending. And I loved Rosmersholm. I thought it was really fantastic and just a really fascinating play with a really, really fascinating main woman character called Rebecca West. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a version of Rosmersholm to watch, so I just listened to like a radio play version of it. But yeah, I hope I will get to see it performed one day. I think it yeah, I'm just very interested. in it. I definitely have read Ibsen before. I can't remember if I've seen a production of Hedda Gabler, but I have definitely read A Doll's House, and you know, a lot of the women that I'm writing about, they are really interested in Ibsen and Ibsen translation and his women especially, obviously, and like what his women are saying about like bourgeois society and marriage. Is that how you say that word? Suddenly I had like a, I don't know. So I've been thinking about him a lot too, or like I've been thinking about him through the eyes of these women, which is, yeah, very interesting to me, in how they kind of like take him up and make him have even more meaning and even deeper meaning. And I don't think I would, sorry about my voice, I don't think I would recommend his, like this collection specifically, and I do think it's kind of good to like go into reading the rest of Ibsen plays once you've read A Doll's House. I feel like it characterises quite a lot of what he's doing theatrically and thematically as well. But yeah, these all of these plays were from the 1880s from him, and yeah, they were all translated from the Norwegian by James Macfarlane. And I am also interested in reading different translations, especially of Rosmersholm. I did watch An Enemy of the People, and I mean the Wild Duck production I watched wasn't like super close to the text or anything, but whatever. I mean, actually I guess it wasn't that far off, but the Enemy of the People one that I watched was directed by Arthur Miller from the 60s, so that was very interesting to kind of compare and contrast with the text that I had and what text he had decided to use. And he made a couple of sort of very specific changes which made it even more kind of strongly about obviously being sort of treated badly during McCarthyism. What's the word where you're not like surveilled, but like where you're pursued. So those are the things that I finished reading. I did think maybe I would talk a bit about, if I can carry it, about some of my reading in the Arcee series by Ursula K. Le Guin. So I guess I'll try, and if my camera dies then bye, and like let me know if you've read anything that I've mentioned or want to read anything, or any other thoughts you have. Yeah, so I finished reading this this month in November, but I'm pretty sure I had actually read almost all of the stories in this before it became November, which is why I thought I would talk a little bit about it. So yeah, the collection is Tales from Earthsea, and there's 5 stories in this, and they are all quite long, though some of them are much longer and then some of them are like fairly short in comparison. There's The Finder, which I definitely read in October, and I thought it was like just a really amazing story. And I guess sometimes with short stories I do feel like you're just not getting enough, and like they're just kind of a bit like you want to have a meal but you're just eating a snack, and I didn't feel that with almost all of these. In fact, I don't think I felt that with any of them, and obviously part of that is because the world is already very like sort of vitally imagined for me, because I read 4 books in the series before this, and I just have like a really deep sense of it. But then also part of that is because of how Ursula K. Le Guin writes and how she creates the world, and I think she creates a world in such like an incredibly like material and sort of historicising way. And I just love that. Like I think it's just fantastic. It's an incredible way to, it's like she is individually creating a world that is like vibrant with kind of a collectivity to it that I just find like fascinating and so inspiring and impressive. And obviously there are a lot of things in Earthsea that are like violent and horrible, and that also is like very intense, but it feels even sort of closer to my world then, because it feels so wedded to, I can't think of the word, it feels so wedded to some kind of like amazing sort of ethical, but that's not really the word I'm looking for, like commitment, maybe a commitment to seeing the world as it is, as a means to demonstrate our capacity to profoundly change the world, to love each other more and better, and to care for each other, and to undo and to unmake things that should be unmade and undone, and to create and make things that should be made. And yeah, I don't know, I don't know that even really tells you what it is like to read these stories and to read these books. And yeah, but I think I will talk about all of them when I've decided, like, you know, it's too stressful, but I want to give it like the time and care to talk about them. So I will talk about them in my November wrap up, which I'm sure you'll see maybe kind of soon actually. So but yeah, they're just really fantastic.